Ja, herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Episode des Experience SAP Podcasts der Sovanta AG. Wir haben letztes Mal mit Michael Kern eine Doppelfolge gemacht zum Thema Use Cases auf der BTP und es hat uns irgendwie so gut gefallen, dass wir gesagt haben, das müssen wir gleich nochmal machen. Diesmal nicht zur BTP, sondern zum Thema Experience Management und zwar beides. Wir machen wieder eine Doppelfolge, einmal zum Thema Customer Experience Management, einmal zum Thema Employee Experience Management und wir machen eben wieder Folgen und Episoden zum Thema Use Cases. Also was ist wirklich an Business Case, an Business Szenario hinter der Technologie zu erwarten? Was machen unsere Kunden? Was sehen wir? Wo sehen wir einfach Häufungen an Use Cases? Wie kann man gut einsteigen in solche Themen? Aber auch, wo geht die Reise hin? Also wir haben versucht, relativ viel an Informationen rund um das Thema Use Cases im Experience Management hier mit reinzubringen. Was heißt wir? Ich bin froh, dass es mir gelungen ist, Dr. Andrew White, einen absoluten Experten in unserem Haus, zu dem Thema für den Podcast gewinnen zu können. Andrew verantwortet bei uns das Thema Data Science, aber eben auch in den Experience Management Bereich ganz stark die wissenschaftliche Unterstützung, aber auch die Implementierungsprojekte. Also er hat ja sehr, sehr breites Wissen rund um Kundenprojekte, aber auch rund um Methodiken, die ganzen Hintergründe. Also der perfekte Ansprechpartner und Gesprächspartner genau für die Runde. Deswegen auch eine kleine Neuerung heute. Wir haben den Podcast auf Englisch gemacht. Andrew spricht zwar eigentlich ausgezeichnet Deutsch, aber wir haben uns am Ende dann dazu entschlossen, doch auf Englisch zu gehen. Das heißt mal eine kleine Neuerung heute. Ich denke, macht trotzdem Spaß und ja, jetzt erstmal viel Spaß beim Zuhören. So Andrew, thanks for joining our podcast today and investing your time, your valuable time in talking to me. It's really a pleasure to have you here today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Christian.
So we had I think a pretty interesting conversation with Michael the last time on BTP use cases, and we said, okay, this whole idea of showing to the audience out there what you can actually do with technologies and what our customers, what businesses have done using that technology, even from a business perspective and a business case perspective, seems to be pretty interesting. So we said, okay, why should we only limit that to BTP? There are other technologies and other tools around there, also in our portfolio, where we should continue the discussion. And the idea was, okay, let's continue with the experience management side, with the Qualtrics side. And who could be better fitted to talk to me about real use cases, real customer use cases than you. So it's really cool that you have the time today.
Great. Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. It's been quite the journey that we've been on in the last couple of years, when within experience management, and gained certainly a lot of insight into what customers are doing in this space.
Yeah, so when we first started, I think it's pretty much the same journey we went through as well to really identify, okay, what can you do with Qualtrics, or what do customers do with Qualtrics? So we had to learn it. Now we have quite some experience here. But for me, still, if we talk about the CX side, and I think this is something we should tackle today, is the first things that come into. There's two things that come into my mind. I would like to get your opinion on that. Is the first one is this the NPS and CSAT all over the place. So that's what comes into my mind first of all when it comes to CX and surveys. So the question number one, and the second one would really be around the whole topic of survey fatigue, because I'm most likely not the ideal customer of ours, because I see that, and I don't know the reason behind it, but I see that I would say 90% of the surveys I get, I just ignore. And so that's just the starting point for me. If it comes to CX, that's the two things I typically see besides our successful projects, but just maybe some words on that from your side.
Yeah, sure. I mean, these are hotly debated topics as to whether companies decide to lead with NPS or CSAT, and that's usually a conversation that we have right at the outset, what the key metrics are that we're going to, I guess, pin the project on. And that there is a degree of overlap. I think that's what the consensus and our investigations have revealed here between the two. Ultimately, I think it really depends on what the goals are. Whether you're interested in using a very well established metric, NPS has been around for quite some time now. It's or whether you are with customer satisfaction, whether you'd like to pin that to something to like a little bit more specific. So willingness to recommend is that's something that we're all familiar with. It's a question that's commonly that we're familiar with. Yeah, how satisfied we are. That's, to me, seems a little bit more concrete. In some cases, I think that there's some sense in actually asking both. The order, I think, is an interesting one there as well, but that's a sort of, we're getting into specifics here then. And to your question about the survey fatigue, I sense that as well. It's we're bombarded with a lot of surveys these days, and so part of the job, our job, then is really to find the best time to actually ask the question. If it's just if it arrives at 4:00 on a Friday, then I think that the likelihood that people answer is quite low. Well positioned. I think it's an invitation that I think that's accepted a little bit more by customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe we'll tackle that in a second, a little bit later. So, what are the strategies to actually make sure that the people are answering? But I would like to come back to the scenarios first. So we talked about NPS, CSAT. So that might be a typical starting point. So is it something you see with our customers, and maybe that's also interesting for a lot of our listeners out there? So what is a good and a common starting project into the CX world? If you consider Qualtrics, you think about licensing Qualtrics, and you think about setting up your journey into this CX world. What is a good starting point there? What kind of use cases do you see?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, transactional based NPS survey is a good starting point. It's solid. It's easy to implement. It's and you can, if you pair this with an open text question after the NPS question, you can get some very quick insights into what's driving this willingness or a lack of willingness to recommend. Then, so I think it is a good starting point. And then off the back of that, then you don't stop there. This is about triggering action. So then we can have conversations with customers and around what they'd like to do with these results, and that opens other sorts of discussions about, okay, how do you want to trigger this action, and who are the recipients of these notifications or prompts then from, say, Qualtrics, for example. Like it opens up lots of opportunities here. So they're the kinds of I guess that's what these projects largely entail. Yeah, that's a good starting point.
Okay, but I understand it's so the important question is not where to start, but most likely rather what to do and what you want to achieve, what to do with the actual results. So I understand, okay, transaction based is good. There's plenty of transaction you could consider with that, but the main topic and the main thing people should ask themselves is what do I want to achieve with that, and how can I actually make use of the results? Yeah,
I can make that more concrete. So for example, if the company is delivering perhaps in like field service, and they want some quick feedback about how that's gone, what that experience has been like, then we can talk about what the trigger is then, and get this survey being delivered to people that are in a good position then to evaluate that experience. And the feedback gets collected, and after that then we need to decide who the best person is then to act on that. If there's been if there are any shortcomings then associated with the service, then we need to decide to whom we need to route the feedback. And that's largely what it entails. It's collecting the info, prompting, collecting the responses, and then acting on this. And there we need to consider who's going to do that acting, then who's taking action.
Is this like an individual scenario so from a little bit dependent on the customer, or do you see any patterns there, how you can make sure that you actually get that to the right people in the right time, and you actually react on insights you received via the surveys in a short amount of time?
There are some, I guess, usual suspects that are involved here. So the field technician themselves, if in this example, then they would probably want to know how they were perceived. That person's line manager and maybe some other people higher up the chain. Usually then these results get aggregated, and then other individuals throughout the organization will eventually see what's going on and how these services are being perceived. But in terms of taking action, then it's usually the people that would, in this case, directly involved. So if it were, for example, we're talking about placing orders, then it would be the person at the organization that's responsible for, maybe within purchasing or within sales, and that was involved in that process.
So then you also, so the idea is also oftentimes to really react on the specific feedback. So you see something that actually happened, and then you want to react on the specific feedback, or is it also like the more generic approach where you say, okay, you see trends and there's some kind of sounding board looking at those numbers and trying to adapt and change the strategy behind it a little bit?
I think it's both. Yes, you need to react to if it's something that's closely tied to this specific service that's gone wrong, then really it is needs to be tightly encapsulated in that. That said, there may be signs that this is an issue that's not just isolated, but it could be related to an internal process that needs to be optimized, and that's where it starts to get interesting then. So. Maybe it's not that single case then that's going to trigger an organizational-wide change, but then over time, if the pattern emerges that there are issues with placing orders or service, in-field service, then these will become apparent, and then someone will need to take action there as well.
Okay. Do you have some other examples? So you talked about field service for this kind of transaction-based thing. So what are other transactions? What are other triggers you see out there for that kind of survey cluster?
So transactionally based, it's very dependent on the organization themselves and what they're offering. Orders, perhaps warranty claims. This is also another one where there's usually a need for implementing listening strategies then. This really depends on the customer journey, so all the touch points that a customer could have with an organization, and that will vary from business to business. But typically, this could be part of it. So there's sales touch points here, there's orders, there's field service, there's a whole host of things that could amount to meaningful touch points here. There's also the warranty and then support phases within projects that would also, I think, be worth checking in on. That's usually part of these kinds of discussions about what the best touch point is, though. Then that's usually something that we explore in workshops, because there are different efforts associated with implementing different listening strategies for different touch points, and so that's part of that evaluation that we do usually up front.
So you're also helping to identify the real touch points, so really identifying or laying out the customer journey, or is it something you expect from the customer to bring you, and then you decide and consult a little bit, okay, what could be a good starting point?
Some customers know instinctively what they want to focus on to begin with, and then in other cases they're asking themselves exactly that question, what the best starting point is, and then we would usually recommend having a simple workshop then to explain then what each of these cases then would entail, and we can explore that together, and then we make a choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we move ahead and say, okay, we have this transactional-based surveys and use cases, what other scenarios do you see? Is there other clusters in the CX world that we've already implemented, or that you see in the out there with our customers?
Well, there's certainly the flip side of the transactional is the relationship-based survey. Then that's something that might get administered, say once or twice a year. Then that's very common. Within the digital space then, so on website-based feedback, then there's the always-on feedback, so the classic feedback button that you see there, so that serves as an opportunity for customers to provide feedback on really anything that they'd like. Then there's also the within that digital space as well. There's a whole host of I think interesting use cases around, say, product, the experience with the product, or the way the product's being presented. It's very common as well. Yeah.
Is there something like an order in which you would tackle that, or is this really dependent on the customer? So is there like, okay, I always like if I have this path layout saying, okay, I want to start in my CX journey. Let's start with a transactional based one. We do a customer journey mapping. We identify the most valid touch point. We start with that, and then we see, okay, maybe now it's time to go into a relationship based one, because that's typically the next step. And maybe then it's more like, okay, we haven't tackled our website. Now it's time for the website. Is this something where you can say this makes sense, or is it a little bit more dependent on the customer?
I think it's dependent on the customer for the reason that that I usually like to understand like what the readiness to actually implement change is. Usually, like, these projects take place as within the broader context of, transforming organizations, which is today, like, for many organizations, that's what they've got on their agendas. Especially given where we find ourselves in 2022, like after 2-year pandemic here. There's major upheaval, and for that reason I think that that's usually the question that I would ask first is, what are you sensing, and then where are you able now to take action in a meaningful way in order to really push things forward to make a difference, right? Yeah, okay. And when that's clear, then usually the use cases and the touch points become clear, and then we have a reasonable starting point then, I think.
So maybe coming back to really the specific use cases, because I guess it's always interesting to see, okay, now we know there's transaction based, we know there's this website stuff, we know there's relationship ones. Maybe again some more specific examples of what that could mean. So what kind of questions do you ask on a website? What kind of relationship building surveys do you see? What could be triggers there? Is it just something you do on an annual basis? What is the groups you send that out? So maybe that could be inspirational for some people to see, okay, what others do here.
So we very much like to anchor this around the experience. So when we start to think about what questions make sense, I think it's largely an exercise in putting yourself in the shoes of the customer themselves. So this requires a degree of empathy, and then where might there be friction? So, and when you've got that clear, then you can explore topics like how easy was it for you to do what you were trying to do? Okay, we want to also clarify what it is that you're trying to do. And once we've gotten past, this, then usually the next point is to explore things like, the satisfaction around the different, touch points. So if we're talking about something specific like ordering, it could be this the satisfaction with this first contact that you've had with somebody at the organization. What was that like? We often say, that first impressions matter, but really, what were they like? What was your impression of them? And then following that through, then it's there's all different sorts of communication that goes into interacting with customers, and so really on that level, then what's your sense of that? Like, what was that like for you then to interact like with us, and here we know in the background who it is that you've probably interacted with within the organization, so we can start to on our side, like on the analytics side, we can get quite some interesting breakdowns about what that's like. Beyond communication, then I'd say that there's the topic about how things have made you feel, right? Like, so not only your satisfaction with the whole host of things that go into this interaction, but but really what's your feeling at the end of it? Like, so you've come out of this, have you had some unexpected surprises, both positive and negative, and then you can pick up those things, and then I think once you tap into the emotions, and that's I think you're usually on the right track then, because you can, emotions, I think we all know they're very powerful and that they drive like a lot of decision making. So this is something that we often encourage.
Okay. Do you see a difference in the answering or in the response rate between like this transactional based ones and the relationship based ones? Because I could imagine that the relationship ones are a little bit longer, and maybe you need more time, and you need to invest a little bit more time, and you need to know who you're answering to a little bit better compared to a transactional one where you say, okay, you really know the transaction, you just want to know feedback about this specific piece. Whereas a relationship-based ones, I could imagine for our company really sending out this yearly surveys of how did the partnership evolve with customers, and how satisfied were you, and that's most likely a little bit longer surveys. Is there a difference? Can you see or recognize something like that?
I think that the transactional surveys have a slightly better response rate.
Okay.
Yeah, but that said, I think if you've got it depends what sample you're sending it to. If they're the especially like key customers, and you've got very good contacts, and you've got good relationship with specific customers, and you send them your relationship survey on an annual basis, then usually the response rates can be quite high there as well. So this is this is a big topic, and really for us then, like I think there's two aspects to this. It's obviously increasing the response rate, getting a high response rate, so that we have a representative voice of the customer. And then in the second instance, I think it's about getting honest signals. So really not asking the standard questions. Sometimes the standard questions are quite okay, but really we want to ask the most relevant questions. And so there, I think, it's important as a platform like Qualtrics, with all the logic that you can build into survey flows, that you don't ask unnecessary questions, but really tailor the survey taking experience as much as possible. Yeah.
Okay, but so this is really a major aspect of the project. So you say, okay, you need to identify approaches and strategies to really increase the response rate. I guess that's really one of the major things you also need to talk to with the customers during the actual design phases of the programs.
That's right, and we don't have all the answers there. This is something where we can certainly make suggestions, but our customers know their customers, and so they're in the best position, in a good position to think really about what the best approach is there. And we've got like experience from a broad base of customers, but usually that's a discussion, and I like having those discussions about as well, like distribution strategies, whether a sampling strategy here might work better rather than like a blanket survey strategy. And by I think there you dive into some interesting into details that I think that ultimately can reduce survey burden, increase survey response rates, and you want to try and ultimately like act on representative data. So by doing that, I think you're positioning yourself well.
Okay. Coming a little bit into the tooling discussion, so it's quite obvious that we are focusing completely on Qualtrics. So our projects are all related to the Qualtrics XM-Plattform, and I think that might also be interesting for some people to understand. Okay, what is the reasoning of our customers behind actually going to Qualtrics, and also for you as the implementer, then at the end of the day, why does it make sense, and what for those specific use cases? So where is the benefit of having a platform like Qualtrics really focusing on experience management and everything? So maybe some insights there of what was the reasoning behind it, and how do you as a partner see that this is a good fit, and it helps us to actually tackle those use cases?
Mm-hmm. I think ultimately it has a lot to do with an alignment of philosophies. So Qualtrics were very quick to realize that this is not just about a survey platform. This is not just about a set of questions you're asking, but this is about truly listening and acting. So I think, and the focus there really is on acting. It's like, they call it a system of action, which I think is a good term for it. but that's really at the heart of what it is that we're trying to do here with customers, to not just report on events, but to actually trigger actions. And that's like I was hinting at before. This is part of like this broader transformation that many organizations are undergoing. And that's important, and it's not to be underestimated how challenging that is. There's all sorts of obstacles. And so you don't want to have a platform then that creates more obstacles. And so that's the second part of the answer, is that it's an incredibly flexible platform. There's very few limitations. I think that they've got lots of experience working with large and medium and small size companies. And I think it was a fairly easy choice for us to see that was a good fit. Yeah.
It feels like that if we talk, because one main thing I understood is, okay, there's certain clusters and there's certain best practices within those clusters, but at the end of the day, it's really a customer specific thing. And it feels like, okay, Qualtrics offers you the chance to be as flexible as possible to tackle those individual ones and still come up with the really solid use case, reusing as many things as possible and reusing the best practices, but really adapting it to the individual needs of the scenario and of the customer.
Exactly. It's I think that the platform itself is growing. It's developing as well. It's already very mature, but it's continuing to develop. The number of extensions and integration possibilities is also growing. The community is strong, which I think is also not to be underestimated. It's a platform, and there are users, and there are partners and organizations that are using this every day, and so a community is important there. But yeah, flexibility is certainly a big part of this. Yeah.
Maybe coming slowly to the end of the podcast, of this episode of the podcast, but you just mentioned the development. So the platform is developing. It's adding new features. It's adding new stuff. But I would assume that also the whole CX experience management side is developing. We've talked a lot about current use cases and use cases we see at the customers we have. Maybe a quick outlook on what you see on the horizon. What are the new topics? In which direction is CX evolving? What could be new use cases? And how does it affect our work as well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a big question.
Easy one for the end, right?
Yeah. So the outlook here. I think it's an incredibly exciting time. Let me just start by saying that there's a lot going on, and I think that so certainly there'll be developments. Obviously, with the tooling will get better. It'll become easier to use. The integrations will become easier. There'll be an increasing number of standard integrations that make setup, I think, increasingly more straightforward. But in terms of sort of the transformation work then that's going on with organizations, I think that this, the bringing together these the experience data with the operational data, that's clearly a part of the Qualtrics messaging here and the philosophy, and I think that's a good one. That's still posing many challenges for, I think, organizations to actually do that in a smooth way, with various CRM systems at play and getting all the data in the right shape and form and quality. So I think there's challenges there, but I think that the big opportunity, putting all the technical stuff to the side, is in actually driving action and ultimately then anticipating action. So if you think about a customer, on his or her journey, customer journey, then I think a move away from reactive, sort of this has happened, so we're now going to do this, but to a more predictive approach, I think is where I see this heading. So what that means, I think, is ultimately the XM space then gets closer to data science. There's so much data that's being generated, and Qualtrics is a powerful platform, but it's also generating lots of data, and I see that there's a great opportunity to make use of it as well as all the, the other information that doesn't make its way to Qualtrics in order to actually preempt what a customer wants at any particular point, and to almost preempt some undesirable experiences that a customer might have with an organization, and then ultimately to align the processes in a more timely manner, like within the company.
Exciting, yeah. So I was just last week on a Qualtrics event where we also talked about XM Discover, so the Clarabridge one. So we just see that there's this social listening, there's this more and more data getting collected, and it's I guess, like you said, it's getting, on the one hand side, more complicated for people to still get the overview on all the data. But on the other hand, there's, like always, if there's a lot of data, there's a lot of things you can do with it. And I really like the idea of thinking in a more predictive way, predicting experiences and making sure that the bad ones actually doesn't happen in the first place. So pretty interesting, exciting times ahead.
For sure, yeah. We talk about this a lot within the team about where we see this heading, and I think that there's a degree of consensus that's it's going to be a game changer once we bring in all the social media and all like yet another set of listening opportunities in, because that's clearly that's relevant then for organizations. They will want to also act on some of this information as well. Yeah.
I always like if we end that podcast with this outlook, because this shows me that there's going to be a follow-up podcast when we talk about this new use cases, obviously, about what had happened at that time. So looking forward to the next one when we talk then about the CX use cases of the future and the predictive CX. Thanks Andrew for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Christian.
It was a great pleasure.
Till next time then, ja?
Absolutely. Ja, das war die erste Episode unserer zweiteiligen Serie zum Thema Experience Management Use Cases. Dieses Mal zum Thema Customer Experience Management. Mir hat es persönlich sehr gut gefallen, mich mit Andrew auszutauschen über die verschiedenen Möglichkeiten, über die verschiedenen Use Case Cluster, die es da gibt. Auch was einem ja so nicht unbedingt direkt geläufig ist, was man machen kann, in welche Bereiche man gehen kann. Also für mich sehr viele spannende Insights. Und natürlich nochmal zum Schluss ein persönliches Highlight für mich auch zu sehen, okay, wo geht die Reise hin? Und ich glaube, da sind wir an vielen Stellen gar nicht so weit davon entfernt in Richtung Predictive Experience Management. Natürlich hat man auch gemerkt, dass Andrews Herz natürlich für das Thema Data Science schlägt und er doch ganz aufgeregt wird, wenn er daran denkt, was für Möglichkeiten es da gibt, wenn man so viele Daten hat und wie viele tolle Sachen man da auch am Ende des Tages rauslesen kann. Ich glaube, im Großen und Ganzen sieht man, das Thema ist heiß, das Thema macht Spaß, das Thema hat extrem viel Business-Nutzen und ich glaube, wir stehen erst ganz am Anfang der Reise. Deswegen freue ich mich auf die weitere Reise und auch Andrew dann in einem der kommenden Podcasts zu den neuen Themen nochmal einladen zu dürfen.